That's what we're really talking about here. It really comes down to everything. It's being mindful with eating. And humans actually do better with structure and boundaries. Alphas, welcome back to the show. My name is Andy Naylor, CEO and founder here at Naylor Body Design and host of your Optimal Alpha podcast. We are back. And today we've got another of our versus episodes. So you may have heard a few of these in the past. We're generally going to pick a couple of topics that seem to be in opposition to each other and just talk through the positives of each, the negatives of each, with a view to, as always, simply giving you information to make a decision that's probably a good decision for you. Quite often with these, there's no wrong or right. And I think that's an important aspect to consider in fitness. There generally isn't a, you must do this, you mustn't do that, this is the best, or this is the worst. Generally, if you hear those sorts of comments being made, I would normally run a mile because nothing is ever that absolute. So today we're going to delve into a food-based versus, and we're going to look at intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, and essentially non-time restricted eating, right? They're just the two opposites. So intermittent fasting is definitely popular. It's super popular actually for many different reasons. It's certainly something that we've seen become more popular, I would say, over the last couple of years. Normally when this happens, you could then start to say, this looks like it's starting to become a fad. Of all of the popular ways of eating, I would say that intermittent fasting is probably one of the least faddy versions of those. Now, I'm pretty harsh when I look at the ways people eat. And, even something like keto to me, generally speaking, I would call a fad, which is a little harsh because there are reasons why that might work for some people, but it's still extremely hard to deal with and stick to very long term. And if it's not something that can be stuck to long term, there will be people that can, and you're probably screaming at me, and I applaud you, well done. But I can tell you, after coaching people for 22 years, the absolute vast majority cannot, do not want to stick to something like keto long term. Therefore, generally speaking, people aren't going into it with the idea of it being a short-term fix. They're thinking it might be a long-term solution because of all the benefits it's portraying with the fast results. That's a fad. Well, intermittent fasting to me doesn't fall into that category for many different reasons. So intermittent fasting versus non-time restricted eating. So let's have a little wander down the road of this. So first of all, let's look at intermittent fasting. Let's dive into some positives. There may well be many more than I list here. These are just the first ones that come to my mind. So the first obvious thing here is it sets a clear time-based eating boundary. That's kind of the whole point of intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating. There's a clear boundary of when you are not eating to when you are eating. For most people, it looks something like not eating past, say, 8 p.m. at night, and then not eating before 12 p.m. the next day. So there's a good portion in the evening and in the whole of the AM where someone isn't eating. And I think this sets very clear mindset and mental clarity around eating as a whole. I think it certainly adds more structure to someone's day food-wise. Well, it clearly does, doesn't it? Because it's chopping the day into segments of when you cannot eat and when you can eat. I think this then has a knock-on positive effect in terms of, I think for most people, it will improve their food choices, probably help structure their meal numbers, and obviously, of course, the actual timing of those meals. Because there is less availability, people tend to generally make better decisions on the food that they're eating, on where in that smaller window they're eating that food. Generally, you take options away from people. People generally pick better options. I think given that there is less time to eat, I think we'd also say it's fair to say less chance of snacking. And snacking to me is a big issue. Just in my personal opinion, I don't think snacking is a thing, unless people are calling mini meals a snack. But if it's just grazing throughout the day, I think for most people, that's not a very good idea. Certainly long-term digestion and certainly for overall caloric control. because who's got a clue what they're eating if they're snacking all the way through the day? I think then less snacking is going to be a positive knock-on effect. And of course, it's a really, really easy way to reduce overall caloric intake because there is less time to eat the food. And therefore, this is probably the biggest benefit that people are looking for. It's then therefore easier, nearly, to drop weight and or i.e. body fat. Now, people will start intermittent fasting because generally speaking, most people are looking to lose weight. Let's be honest, that's 90% of the people that we help in terms of inside the business, inside our program, are in some degree looking to lose weight. Fat, let's be clear. And of course, if we reduce the amount of time someone can eat, therefore, they reduce mostly the amount of calories they consume, and that's where the main fat loss element comes from. There's nothing else inherently special, technical, strategic necessarily in terms of intermittent fasting. It just makes reducing calories and controlling calories easier. Any diet, any way of eating that you are adopting to help you control weight, lose fat, the root of that diet, that strategic way of eating, will be caloric control, and that's the end of that. There may be other things going on, but if you do not have caloric control and therefore not in a caloric deficit, you just aren't going to lose body fat. So this is where something like going back to keto, again, there are other benefits, and I'm not going to use this podcast to delve into those, but if you've got 3 macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and you remove one of those 3 macronutrients, it's probably quite easy to reduce overall caloric intake because you've just removed all the carbohydrates, which is a lot of your snacky type foods. So it's just a very, very easy way to reduce overall caloric intake and manage weight. I think another knock-on effect of where this can be useful is it can control daytime hunger. Now, I'm one of those people that whenever I start eating in the morning, generally from that point forward, I'll be eating on a regular cadence for the rest of the day. So if I eat at, say, let's say I always have breakfast, I don't know, like a 6, 7 a.m., right, before going off to a regular 9 a.m. work type pattern. If I ate that early, I would then be eating 2 to 3 hours later, 2 to 3 hours later, 2 to 3 hours later. Before I realize it, I've eaten a lot of food. So by pushing eating further back, we control our hunger hormone called ghrelin. This may be different for everybody. I know that if I wake up and I eat, and what happens is for me, then ghrelin starts to become active. I have the sensation that once I've digested that food, I want to eat more food. It then gets harder to control hunger, therefore the desire to eat, therefore caloric control through the day. By just pushing the first meal further back into the day, it makes that control of that hunger easier. You can be hungry in the first part of the day. You could wake up hungry. It will disappear. You don't just get hungrier. That will disappear over time. And I can certainly prove this. I mean, I've done a 7-day water-only fast, so I didn't eat anything for 7 days. Well, I didn't just get hungrier and hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. The hunger disappeared eventually. It would come in waves and go. So, but having said that, I think when you eat in the morning, for many people, control of that hunger gets more difficult. I think also there is definitely something to say that it gives your digestion a break, because there's a longer period of time where there's no food going through it, and there's a less volume of food going through your digestion overall. So this can certainly help with autophagy or autophagy, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is essentially the cellular cleansing of the gut, the ability for the gut to actually look after itself, cleanse itself, while it's not having to do the monotonous work of digesting food. I think there's certainly something to be said for having that. Now, I've been somebody who has suffered with IBS reasonably bad for a good decade and a half now. And I know I fell into intermittent fasting by accident. I don't even really think it's what I do. I just don't start eating until, it's now 9:26 in the morning when I'm recording this. I will probably eat in another hour and a half. It's normally between 11 and 12 for me. That just seems to fit me. I don't have it has to be past 12. That doesn't really make a difference to me. But I definitely go the vast majority of the morning without eating. And therefore, in terms of bloating, in terms of digestive stress, it's going to reduce because I'm just leaving my stomach alone for longer. And so I think it can reduce bloating overall and help with digestion overall. Less food to digest, less volume going through. I think it can also help with cognitive function. I don't know about all of you. I certainly know that if I'm digesting food, depending on what the food is, carbohydrates mostly, but if I'm digesting food, I'm never quite as sharp mentally as if I'm not digesting food. There are many reasons underneath that. I just think we can all probably say that, think about having that big meal. And let's think of the biggest versions of this: Thanksgiving, Christmas, Sunday lunch. Think of one of those big meals. Like, after that, are you the most mentally sharp and cognitively firing that you are? No, you're dozy, sleepy, tired, because your body is sending blood and resources to your gut to absorb in and stimulate that nutrition, and it's not in your brain as much. So I think cognitive function can certainly be improved. And then I think overall systemic inflammation can be reduced, really coming from the fact that the body's just not having to do quite as much work. Many benefits. Okay. Negatives to intermittent fasting. Well, the really obvious one here is hard to get enough food in if you're trying to gain weight. And this could be a big group of people. So there are people out there, think of people looking to add muscle mass. Okay, you're not dieting down and adding muscle mass at the same time. You have to put enough calories in to build new tissue. That's called a caloric surplus. For some people, it can be a lot higher than they think it's going to be. So if you're trying to gain weight, to give you some perspective, the last time I really tried to add muscle, I was probably in the 4,000 to 4,500 calories a day. Now, for some people, they're like, yeah, they could trip over and eat that amount of food. So for some people, that's easy. For me, with my digestion, that was actually quite difficult. Well, if I didn't start eating first thing in the morning, I just didn't have enough time in the day to get the food in, digest it, and then be ready for the next meal. So there is less time, of course, to fully eat and digest food if we're trying to eat enough calories and food to gain weight. Also, most intermittent fasting or most time restricted eating is something like don't eat past 8 p.m. and don't eat before 12 p.m. It's that window. It's don't eat for the very last part of the day and the first part of the day. And it generally is using the fact that you're asleep for about 6 to 8 hours a night as part of the fasting, which you're all doing anyway. Unless you're getting up in the middle of the night and eating through the night, that's a different subject. So this normal window might not fit your life, your work, your family, your training, your travel. So therefore, could it still work? Yes, but you would need to think about where you're going to shift that window to. And what I wouldn't suggest is you're shifting the window around a lot. You should try and find a window that you're going to stick to. Well, if you've got travel and time zone changes and all these other life factors in place, having a restricted time to eat could now really not work for you. I think also it can lead to binging in the eating window, if not mindfully eating. Most people don't really mindfully eat. When I'm hungry, I fall into this category. Sometimes there will be maybe my second or third meal. I'll have been working and then suddenly 3 or 4 hours have passed and I'm like, I am hungry. I'm between 2 meetings or calls. I need to get some food in. I've got 15 minutes and I essentially inhale that meal. And as I'm doing it, I'm like, oh goodness, I've got 3/4 of the way for this meal and I haven't really thought about what I'm doing. I'm just getting the food in. I haven't chewed it. I'm not going to digest it. And then for the next 3 hours, I will feel very undigested because I'm rushing the food in. And that's because I intermittent fast kind of on accident, but I'm still not mindfully eating. So I think there can certainly be an ability to then just not be conscious of what's being ate and how well it's being ate. I think this can, as I've just said there, lead to rushing eating, rushing food, and not digesting well. Can also, I think, if we're restricting time, maybe lead to later in the day eating than we would prefer. Why? Well, let's imagine we start eating at 12, 1, somewhere in there. And let's imagine the day gets away from us. Meetings, interruptions that we weren't expecting. It's possible that the final meal gets pushed further and further back. That's okay, but it then means people might be going to bed, not having fully digested a meal. Again, I fall into that category a lot, having not digested a meal properly because I tend to eat late and that's not a good thing. We want to be eating a good 3 hours before we go to bed to get the mechanical work of digestion done. So I think there could be concerns there. And again, it's also on the other end of the day, it's not great if training hard, and I say training hard really early in the morning. So let's say that your schedule means that you want to get up and you're hitting the gym at anywhere between 5, 6, 7 in the morning and you're training hard and what I would call glycolytic work. In other words, cardio, yes, maybe, but really what I'm talking about is lifting weights, the sort of movements that are burning off glycogen in your muscles, which obviously depleting you of glycogen. Now, depending on how hard you're dieting, what muscle mass you've got, and a whole bunch of other things, it would then not be really wise for you to then fast if you're going to go off and say do manual work, dangerous work. If you have that type of work and you've gone off and trained really hard and you're now not going to eat for another 6 hours or something until, I don't know, 1 o'clock, but you're, say, operating heavy machinery, doing dangerous work, I don't think intermittent fasting in the morning might be the smartest thing for you to do. And I think also, as I've mentioned, I think intermittent fasting is just a lot harder if travel is part of your life, because you might be moving through time zones, and I think it becomes just a little over restrictive. So lots of positives, few interesting negatives in terms of the intermittent fasting. We'll come back to that. Alphas. I interrupt this show with a simple message. This show is here to benefit you and your progression to the best version of yourself. But not only just you, it's also here to benefit the people around you, your loved ones, your friends, other alphas in your vicinity. So why not do a really cool thing today? Something that I would thank you for, and maybe someone else would. Share this podcast with at least one other alpha out there who you know would benefit from it. Why not share the information, share the ability for someone else to grow? I'm sure they would thank you. I 100% would absolutely thank you. This podcast only grows by our listeners, our followers doing amazing things like giving us 5-star reviews, downloading podcasts, subscribing, and then of course sharing it with other people. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Share it with one person, and of course drop us a 5-star review, download the podcast, and of course subscribe. And now back to the show. Let's look at the sort of opposite side of this coin, which would be non-time restricted eating, which essentially is what most people are doing, right? In other words, kind of eat when you like. So let's go through the positives and negatives, and we'll round up and we'll go from there. So the positives of non-time restricted eating is literally you can eat when you like. So you've got full freedom to eat when you like in the day. That's a positive. I'll also mention that it's a negative, but I would say for now, that's a positive. So therefore, it's fully time flexible. Eat at any time, fit it around any schedule. It doesn't take a lot of thought. If you're hungry, eat. Like it's very, very straightforward, and it's how most of us are brought up. Most of us aren't really brought up with intermittent fasting being the norm. I would say it's not the norm. I would say it's something that most of us try. So most of us are non-restricted eating. But I think the positive there is it can be very time flexible. It's of course then easier to get in larger volumes of food. So we go back to someone who's desperately trying to get in huge, not necessarily just volumes, but huge amounts of calories, say, 3, 4, 5,000 calories a day because of whatever it is that they do. And they're trying to add weight and they're just burning through calories because of their daily activity. If they can now start eating at 6 in the morning and finish eating at 10 at night, they've got way more chance of getting in a higher level of food because they've got more time to eat it. I think for some people, a positive here could be there is less food focus in the daily life. Some people want less food focus, which is cool. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people want more food focus. Some people need it and want more, and some people need and want less. So here we're looking at positive. So I think for some people there could be less food focus, and this could go back. Let's say we've got somebody who has had in their life food-based problems, disorders in terms of like disordered eating, things like that. I would say certainly it could be fair that someone who has gone through something like that come out the other side. They probably don't now want certain elements entered into their life where they're having to focus on food, because what had they maybe been doing a lot in the past, really focusing on food. So maybe now mentally, psychologically, it'd be wise to not focus on food a lot. So time restricted eating could benefit someone in that circumstance. I think it also could be a positive to not have the time restricted eating in. I think it's also not having restrictions. It's way easier to be social, way easier on travel, and way easier possibly on work life, work meetings, presentations, whatever that might be. It's just easier to, I would say, live overall life. Now, whether that gets us the result, depending on what the result might be, is a different question. But I think it's just non-time restricted. You take away restriction, generally things get easier. Now, does managing weight, building a better physique, having better health get easier? Possibly not. So let's look at the negatives. So the negatives of non-restricted eating are it's way easier to overeat. So if your goal is fat loss, then it's just easier not to hit the goal. by default. It's just easier not to control calories because you've got way more time to eat. You've got more time to eat, more time to snack. The more time you have in a day, chances are the more you'll eat, the more you'll snack, the more calories you'll eat, the less chance you've got of dropping or maintaining weight. It's as simple as that. There's less time structure. So now we might have somebody who really does benefit from having structure. Good example is, if we take this to maybe an extreme, think about someone maybe getting on stage or competing, or where their physique has to be able to do certain things on a performance level, and therefore food becomes a really critical part of that, like any kind of athlete. Having less structure generally isn't a good idea. We probably want to have more structure so that we have very clear boundaries between what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, and then how we can track what we might deem to be success off the back of that. Okay. In other words, we're not shooting at a target from a moving thing. If we're trying to drop body fat, we know that we need to do a certain amount of movement in the day. We need to eat a certain amount of calories. And it's easier eating a certain amount of calories if we say, well, eat that in a certain window of time. Okay. It's just more structure. It's more boundaries, which for some people works really well. I think there's the negative of this also is there's less mental food structure. So this is the opposite. Some people really do need food structure. I honestly think most people benefit from more mental food structure. Why do I say this? Because if somebody needs, for the most part, if somebody needs to lose a reasonable amount of body fat, it's the very fact of not having any structure and boundaries and limitations that got them into that place in the first place. Think about that for a second. If someone says to me, oh, I just need to lose 10 to 15 pounds, 90% of the time I know that that's not the case. Humans vastly underestimate the amount of fat they need to lose. And I think it's just normal and nothing wrong with that. So whenever someone says that, I know someone could be in a lot better shape if they lost 20 to 30. So the reason that someone generally gets out of shape, whatever we want to deem being out of shape, but let's say unhealthy, carrying too much body fat, is because they just didn't have any limits, didn't have any structure, therefore eat at any time of the day, therefore eat more food, snack more. And I think that's really what gets people into a muddle. Too much bloody choice. Too much choice. Too many foods on the menu. Too much time to eat it. So putting in restrictions, I think, really helps. I think it's also harder to control cognitive function, again, if eating at any time during the day and having no major control over that. Again, if someone's getting up really early in the morning and eating a very carbohydrate-dense breakfast, there's nothing wrong with that. But most people might then become a little mentally sluggish, the other side of having that carbohydrate-based meal. Now, I can attest to this. So I'm normally up at just gone 4 o'clock. Just gone 4 o'clock. I'm normally in the gym for about 20 past, 5:30. I'm normally home around 7:30, 8. I then normally work for a couple of hours, 7, 8, 9, and then eat maybe somewhere in that sort of 11 mark. And that first meal for me will be 100 grams of cream of rice, which is just rice flour, essentially. Very easy to digest, but also very highly carb dense. Well, it's basically just carbs. So I have 100 grams of that, 2 scoops of whey protein, a little bit of dark chocolate in there, and berries. So it's quite a big meal. It's the biggest meal I'd eat in the day. 30 minutes to 45 minutes later, I'm asleep. Like that meal, I know I've got up early, but that meal will be the catalyst to me then going off and having a nap in the middle of the day, which then allows me to then work way later into the day. But it's normally that meal hitting me, which I need to replenish that food. So it's the right choice of meal for the training and the goal that I've got. However, if I then needed to go off and do something very mentally challenging, like say sitting here, well, not that this is mentally challenging, but if I wanted to then sit here and record a podcast and cover topics, hopefully in an articulate way, if I'd had my cream of rice 45 minutes ago, I just wouldn't be able to do it. I wouldn't be able to think clearly. So I think cognitive control takes a bit of a hit. I think it's also harder to control overall digestion. And that, again, could be, I think, really down to volume of food eaten through the day. I think overall, non-restricted eating in the terms of dropping body fat and getting in shape and being healthy, I think it's easier to fail at the day as a whole. I just think the opportunity for failure is way higher. If you think about it, it makes sense, because what gets people into the bad place in the first instance, it's too much option and no structure. So Those were the thoughts that I had, and you may well have many others that sort of come to your mind that you've maybe experienced in your own journey through, whether you've tried intermittent fasting or not. My own opinion, I think, is, and certainly this is so how I eat. I essentially, like I said, I train in the morning. I have cream of rice, which I'm going to be eating after this. So what is it now? It's now nearly 10 o'clock. So I might be having it slightly early today, but I'll have my cream of rice. And then really all the meals I have after that are very protein, veg, protein salad, protein, veg, protein salad. That's just 10, and I'll eat probably too late in the day, maybe about 8 p.m. at night. I'm trying to finish my eating before 7 p.m. at night. I go to bed at 9, so I've got 2 hours of clear digestion. So it's just a degree of structure. And if I'm sticking to a structure, basically a plan, and it works, then I know that if I just continue to stick to that thing, the chances are it will continue to work. If I'm doing something that I can't quantify and I'm not getting the result that I want, then what would I do? I wouldn't know what to change, because I'm then trying to throw at a dartboard with a blindfold on while I'm being spun round. I don't know what's going on. So I think for the most part, most people, I really do truly believe this, most people would do far better with having some degree of restriction in their life. Food choice restriction as well helps. Most people are like, I'm a foodie, Andy. I want to eat all yeah, we're all a foodie. Honestly, in 22 years of doing this, the amount of people I've met who are like, I really couldn't care for food. I eat it because I have to. That's like less than 10 people who've ever really, truly said that to me in all these years. And I can still remember those people. They're like, food, I could take it or leave it. I eat it because I'm pretty sure I have to, otherwise I'm going to die. Most other people are, Andy, I'm a foodie. I love food. And I'm like, yeah, cool. Don't we all? But there has to then be a sort of a line walked between liking food and just shoveling it down your face and getting out of shape, overweight, unhealthy, and liking food and just having structure and being mindful with that eating. That's what we're really talking about here. It really comes down to everything. It's being mindful with eating. And humans actually do better with structure and boundaries. That's why we have deadlines. They get things done by a certain point. Humans need structure and boundaries. And just putting in so we go back to just a simple time-based structure, I think for a lot of people can really help. No, it does not suit everybody. Absolutely not. I think for a good majority, I think it can really help. And can it be stuck to long term? Yes. I also believe for the vast majority, because also here's the thing. If you're intermittent fasting, and let's say for a week you travel and you can't intermittent fast, you haven't broken the thing. If you go on keto and you're in ketosis, peeing on sticks and all this crap, if you're in that place and then you go off and eat carbs for a week, you technically will have brought yourself out of ketosis. You've got a lot of work to do to get yourself back in there. In other words, it's backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. You are technically breaking that diet, that strategy. Whereas with intermittent fasting, you can dip in and out of it. I don't think it's not that it needs to be something like, okay, for the rest of my life, I'm not going to eat past 8 p.m. and I won't eat before 12. It's not really one that you can break. So there we go. There are my thoughts on intermittent fasting. I think a lot of our clients, if I really think about it, actually probably intermittent fast, given their working life, given how busy they are in terms of travel, in terms of work, in terms of needing to be cognitively firing. I think if I was to look through the plans of the clients, who our coaches in the program look after, I think there's probably quite a lot of intermittent fasting in there. And I certainly think a lot of people could certainly benefit from it in terms of the structure. That will do for today. My guys, thank you so much for joining me on the show. As always, if you found this useful, pass this forward. Think about how you may have heard of this show. Did someone recommend it to you? Did you see a comment? Did you see a like? If you do the same thing, I would appreciate you, and you might just help someone else out there. For now, over and out.